Hello and welcome. You're watching QTV and you're watching The Week in Review, and I'm your host Ade Darami, and I have here with me my co-host Mr. Mamadou Mboj, and as I say every week, Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Ade.
And for viewers, both old and new viewers, here's how it works. We take 10 stories, big stories from the week, and we go through them in some detail. And all 10 are equally good, I promise you. Now, unless you've been living under a rock and you're in the Gambia, then obviously you know that the election season has kicked off. Yes, we've had the nominations, but now it's down to the business end, the campaigning. Have a look at this.
The Gambia will vote for a president on December 4th, where President Adama Barrow, the incumbent and candidate of the National People's Party, is seeking re-election. He is being challenged by 5 other candidates: the United Democratic Party leader Ousainou Darboe, GDC's Mama Kandeh, PDY's Khalifa Abubakar Sallah, National Unity Party Abdoulaye Jammeh, and Esambay Fall, an independent candidate. The President's Party, NPP, is backed by more than 4 political parties and 4 presidential aspirants who withdrew or were ruled ineligible by the IEC, hence what they are calling the Grand Coalition.
The Grand Coalition, Mr. Mboj, a case of, and then there were 6. The president and 5 others. First of all, we had the whole business of 26, then 23, weeded out, and then although a couple have said they were going to challenge, doesn't look like they really are going to challenge. But we're now left with 6, and as I said, the campaigning starts in earnest.
Absolutely, and we sort of suspected that, didn't we?
All along, people said 5 or 6.
Something like that, so yeah. Absolutely, so conforming to the rule book, as it were, of politics.
Indeed.
Yes, so the hostings have begun. Of course, some people have certain anxieties.
Sure.
How would it pan out? What's going to happen? How would the candidates conduct themselves?
Sure.
What kind of language would be used? Of course, you will have some loose cannons, if you like, with the inflammatory language and provocative stuff and all the rest of it. So, but what do we do? I mean, as it is said that for democracy to work, it takes more than politics. It takes everybody.
Sure.
So people, we have to be responsible.
Indeed.
I think that generally that will be the case.
Yes.
But you know that, for instance, in rallies, you'll have all sorts of people going there, jobs and, you know, criminals even. You'll have all sorts. So, but the decent people, generally, you have more decent people, the peaceful people. They must make sure that that doesn't happen. We must try to police ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because you know, leading up to this weekend, when this is being broadcast, I counted that we've been invited about 8 events which have been talking about peace, no hate speech, and that sort of thing. But what's been interesting is they've also said that don't just leave it to the political parties. You, the citizens, also take ownership of being the ones who are peaceful in your conduct, in your manners, and so on. And if somebody has opposing political views or affiliations, so be it. It's not a reason to get into a fight. Yes. So that message has been coming up and been cascaded throughout most of the stuff that we've seen.
Absolutely. I have sort of had a go with certain civil society organization agents and staff. I said to them, you tend to focus more on our rights. What about our responsibilities? And that is really the key.
That's right.
You know, at all levels. Yeah. So let us focus on that as well. Yep, and political parties, they have a huge role to play. And the media.
Yes.
How we report events. We must be very careful. True. Because sometimes, perhaps in a rally, you might have people who might actually wear the party's T-shirt, but they're not really political. Possibly they wouldn't even go and vote. And then they will go and do all sorts of things, what they shouldn't do, really, maybe being violent or and stuff like that. And then we impute that to the party.
Sure.
So we must be very careful how we report, look at the details and stuff like that, because this will determine really the temper, as it were, of the whole election. And then I've heard something, the police, that also matters. Remember, some time back, was it an audio, video? Somebody apparently, the deputy IG saying that what the president says is law.
Yes, quite.
We all know that that is not true. It doesn't work like that.
Quite.
And it echoes uncomfortably, what can I call it, the work ethic of the former government.
Of the previous, yeah.
So we shouldn't be doing these things. I hope that it is not true,
Indeed.
because I'm really not sure whether it is true or not.
Yes.
But if he said that, no, that is not true,
Sure.
and we want to move away from that
Yes,
kind of
and to be
politics.
fair, I'm not sure we've seen evidence of that.
At all.
And in these early days, 3-4 days or whatever it is of the campaigning, seems to have been more boisterous than violent, really. And I think we hope that remains the case throughout the rest of the period.
You know, we talked about this some time back. That yes, there are all these anxieties and stuff, but we thought that, I still think it, that generally it will be peaceful.
Yeah.
You will possibly have skirmishes, if one can call it
What's
that,
happened?
here and there. So, but then it matters what we do. That is why I brought that one up, particularly with the police. There's no evidence for that, but it's important for all state institutions to know that the rule of law, regulation, objectivity, impartiality, these are the things that would make it easier, as it were, to maintain peace. If people feel aggrieved, as it were, because of a conduct or a comment by a state agent, that's not good. That's not going to give us peace. So that is it. And the same language and being temperate, as it were, temperance, be the parties and be it individuals. Once you have these, then perhaps we'll have a peaceful elections. I expect it. We just shouldn't allow sort of the minority to derail the whole thing. That's all.
A good point there, and I think, you know, we hope, we pray, but most of all, really, as Mr. Mboju said, it's us. It depends on us. Don't keep saying, you know, it depends on this, that, or the other, rights and so on. Responsibility. Take responsibility for your own actions and let them be good. Thank you, Mr. Mboju. And now, in terms of the elections, of course, every time there's an election in Africa, a couple of things happen. One of them is there's likely to be an observation mission or an observer mission from the EU, sometimes from the UN. Guess what? No different this time. Have a look.
We are observing the whole electoral process, the legal framework, the electoral administration, voter registration, nominations, campaigning, the conduct of the media and also social media, voting and counting, the tabulation of results, and electoral dispute resolution.
Now, I confess, I chose that deliberately because all those last things he mentioned, the media, voting disputes, counting and tabulation, could apply to America. But I suspect they didn't send an observer mission to America. Mr. Mboju, we kind of take it for granted now that the EU and others will send observation missions, as it's actually called, although we keep saying observer missions. Observation mission to African countries. Is it just something we should accept now, or should we kind of kick back against it?
Yeah, I understand that they send on average 30 of these missions around the world. I mean, obviously focusing on, you know, Africa, Asia, and that sort of thing. Latin America, Caribbean, I've heard. That sort of thing. Yes, well, they assume that they are democratic. They are sort of like the referees.
Yes, indeed.
They know, you know, democracy, the institutions, how it should work, and all of that. But we all know that democracy is not perfect.
It never is.
You never really achieve it, if you know what I mean. It's more of a direction.
Indeed.
It's not a destination, if you know what I mean.
Quite. It's a road to travel. And interestingly, in a clip that we did not show there, they mentioned also that they are impartial. They said, we're not here to support anyone, sort of party or person. We're here to observe. And at the end of that observation, we will give our comments. Generally, as I said, we welcome these sorts of things in most African countries, and in fact I gather that they have come here at the invitation of our electoral commission. They haven't kind of forced themselves upon us. And so I asked the question, do we need them?
And led by a member of Parliament.
Yes,
the European Parliament.
Yes.
Absolutely. Do we need them? My suspicion is that, yes, we invited them, but because they give us so much money.
Yes.
And then they're not impartial. They have an interest in it. They would rather have a president, you know, who is on their side.
Indeed.
As it were. And they have an agenda. There are certain values, as it were. They call it their own agenda, be it gender equality and all this sort of thing.
Yes.
So they would be partial.
Yes.
You
know, one of the reasons I mentioned this is there's been an observation mission recently to Sierra Leone, and they issued their report 2 weeks ago, and it has kicked up an absolute stink because the judiciary, they absolutely lambasted the judiciary in it, and the judiciary, including the Chief Justice on down, they've hit back, saying that this was ill-founded comments on them, that they didn't ask the right questions. Astonishingly, they accused the EU mission of not even speaking to the Chief Justice or the communication officer for the Department of Justice, whom they said would have given them some of the answers they want, and yet they were there for 3 weeks. Yep. And so these, we're talking about democracy not being perfect, but neither are these missions seemingly.
At all. They always come, you know, they have an angle. Everybody's got an angle. So this is where perhaps the press can arbitrate.
Sure.
Let's go and investigate what actually happened. You have claim and counterclaim and all that sort of thing. This is where the press helps. So this is really what democracy is. It's a process. Sure. You know. So yes, everybody's got an angle. Fine, they can come, but I think they only came so that to make sure that they observe what we're doing to know whether they will send us money. It just depends on what we do. That's it. It depends on what we do. Yes. When they feel that something is not going right, then they squeeze the money a bit so to tweak you in the direction that they want you to go. Sure. So it is as much for themselves as for us. As
for us. So we will read the reports and we will take it in good faith that you know, we either know they have an agenda or we suspect they have one, but so do we. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now, on to our next story, third story. Climate Change Conference, COP26, is happening in Glasgow in Scotland, and our Jennifer Sonko is there, as is the Vice President representing the Gambia. And she gave a very powerful speech which went down very, very well. Have a look.
In 2014, we asked the following questions. If urgent action is not taken now, when shall we take them? When shall we act to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions? These questions, in my view, still remain unanswered. Nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and other commitments to the Paris Agreement are not sufficient enough to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Certainly, not enough to protect the lives of vulnerable communities in many developing countries around the world.
Vice President Toure calls on participants of the COP26 not to leave Glasgow without robust and effective rules set for the Paris Agreement.
They shouldn't leave without robust and effective rules. Mr. Mboj, I used to get invited to these sorts of conferences, and I've said on another platform I stopped going because all we did was talk. It was pleasant being there, it was pleasant flying to different places, but at the end of the day I found people were not being forced to make resolutions that they could stick to or that could be monitored properly. Climate change, the biggest thing is that yes, the Gambia, little Gambia, can say we're ahead of the world in a particular aspect of it, but the crux of it is the biggest polluters, we have no power to enforce them, do we?
Absolutely.
And force them to make decisions or stick to them.
At all. And the pledges, I think in the story we heard about the pledges by 190 countries, but non-binding.
Yeah, quite.
Yes, and I've read a few articles, a lot of observers, you know, are really not optimistic.
No, quite.
They will have all kinds of pledges, they write all sorts of things, but the biggest polluters, as you said. It's not in their interest, and they're kind of careless. Even though recently we had the China US deal, they've been billing it as something significant.
Yes.
What we will see in reality will be quite interesting. So this is the unfair thing, isn't it? Look at it now. We didn't do much. I mean, we contribute only less than 0.5%, I hear. And when you take Gambia, 0.01.
Yeah,
and now we stand to suffer the most.
This is it.
That was why the president of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, that piece he wrote, saying that, hey, look, we're not begging.
Yeah, quite.
This is a cleaning fee.
He was right.
He told the rest.
And if people haven't seen it, they should check out that video because he gave a brilliant speech.
Absolutely.
And he kind of held their feet to the fire and said, as you rightly said, this is not we're not begging. You're filth, and we're telling you pay us to clean it up. And pretty much that's what we should be saying. Also, interestingly, I won't name them because they give us aid and so on, but several oil-producing countries didn't even bother to turn up because they felt that the whole thing was moving away from fossil fuels, which of course is how they've made their fortunes and risen to where they are now. So they've been criticized and been told that they were disrespecting the thing by not turning up. So if those don't know, then what hope is there?
Absolutely, and we in Africa, this is really going to be a very difficult situation in the sense that, we get most of our funding from them, just as we said earlier.
True.
So they have their agenda.
That's right.
So now they probably wouldn't fund our own fuel infrastructure, as it were, and we rely on that so much for now.
Yes.
So how would we develop and then yet adapt to climate change? We don't have the resources.
Well, this is it. And for a country like the Gambia, the biggest temptation and probably the biggest dilemma is around the corner. If oil is sort of prospected off our coastline, that could change everybody's lives in the Gambia.
Absolutely.
When the rest of the world is saying move away from fossil fuels, including oil, is that something we want to hear? I'm not sure it is.
Well, you've heard the big economies, they wouldn't take any notice. But for us, because of our vulnerability, so this is it. They will take advantage of that, and this is the problem. Unless we strengthen ourselves, then we'll be subject to this sort of indignities, as one might even call it. So they will not give any funding for certain projects. And how do we deal with that? That is the challenge.
That's the challenge. And as COP26 closed this very weekend, all around, just go online, you'll see all the papers saying, this time make sure you hold them to account, and so will we. And so watch this space. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Now, the Gambia, like many countries along the West African coast, heavily dependent on tourism, and tourism was very, very badly affected by COVID-19. And there are signs of recovery and signs of hope. Don't believe me? Have a look.
Syrian Prera, the manager of Meeting Point Restaurant, states that since the start of the season and the arrival of the first flight, business has been going well for them.
Well, the improvement, for me, it's improving, not like 2 years ago. So for me, I think this season, it's going to work well. Because what I saw this first week since we opened, it has been going well, and it has been coming in, like how we used to say it.
I deliberately wanted to end with that, with a smile on her face, because I think that tells a story more than words, possibly. So, Mboj, you and I have visited what used to be the kind of tourist area, and there are signs of life, which is quite remarkable compared to 2 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it. I mean, the restaurant where I hang out, just taking that one as a sample. I know the owner personally, so we've been talking over the years, at least the past 2 years. And the fears, we've seen how their income has gone down so drastically, and the impact it had on the staff. They had to cut the staff. So recently, when you're seeing that some tourists are coming back, and then you also see that some staff are coming back.
Yes.
So I have seen personally.
Because I know of a particular one which used to be my favorite restaurant, which closed down completely as a result of it. So yes, there are signs and signs of hope, as I said, introducing that story.
Absolutely, and sort of once we had the jab, that was very interesting. I think that was a game changer. that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we were getting some reports in the West that because of the lockdown, these people haven't been sort of cooped up.
They felt imprisoned.
So they felt imprisoned. So they just wanted to break out and travel. So that was interesting.
And my brother, as we speak, is in Madeira. And in fact, he told me, he just sent me a message saying, I didn't know the airport is called the Cristiano Ronaldo Airport. I said, where have you been? Of course, everybody knows that. But anyway, he's one of those who felt cooped in. He lives in England. And he thought, well, the first chance I get myself, him and his wife, and they've travelled and they've gone to Portugal for 10 days. And many people are now coming here and really, we just keep our fingers crossed that, it's up and up.
Absolutely, and we sort of suspected, after, what I've just said, that no matter what, this year will be an improvement to last year's. That much we know, and whatever happens next year and all the rest of it. But for the longer term, though, government, we must really think what should be our tourism policy.
Yeah, quite.
It contributes so much, and yet so much of it is not in our hands.
Yes. You get the sense that we're not tapping into the potential that's there, the undoubted potential that's there.
So how do we restructure it, as it were?
And that's been my criticism, because I said time and time again that, COVID gave us a chance to stop, pause, think and plan, strategize. Okay, when we come back, are we going to just come back the way we were before, or better and stronger? And I wanted us to come back better and stronger, and I don't get the sense that we are yet.
Absolutely, and when I hear especially the Ministry of Tourism and all of that telling us all these schemes, these projects they have, government is going to spend it. We don't want government to be spending too much there. The spending must be taken to either agriculture or health and all of that.
Sure.
Then I bring in more private sector. They do the investments and the like. This is what you do. I mean, tourism is one area where you can give it to the private sector. I really don't want my Ministry of Tourism to be spending too much. Let's give it to other sectors, and the private sector will provide the funding.
That's it. I think a great note to end on that particular one. And I think totally agree with you on that one. So we're both in agreement on that. Now on to something else. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about the diaspora and how much they contribute to the Gambia. A lot of it is centered around money, remittances, but there's so much more. And recently an event happened that actually means to take that to a different level. Have a look.
Declared the 8th region of the Gambia by President Adama Barrow in 2018, the diaspora is recognized as an extension of the country with an estimated over 142,000 Gambians living abroad. According to the Diaspora and Migration Director of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Musa Kamara, the Roundtable Diaspora Conference aims to gather useful information on the activities and challenges of the Gambian diaspora for a chance to use facilities and explore opportunities for the benefit of Gambia's citizens living abroad. The Permanent Secretary One of the Gambia's Foreign Affairs Ministry, Suleiman Omar Njai, sees the conference as a platform for a consultative and collaborative engagement among actors to guide diaspora policy making, given the immense role of the diaspora in national development.
May I emphasize here, and now that the role of the Gambian diaspora in national development has won unprecedented recognition from my ministry. It has become a worldwide phenomenon that the role of the diaspora is globally recognized as a contributing factor to national development.
From the ministry there, Mr. Mboj, I've been involved in diaspora matters for a long time, mainly in Sierra Leone, but in other countries, Uganda, Ivory Coast, Rwanda as well, where I'm a kind of honorary citizen of all those countries. Just because I've always felt that they should harness the diaspora better than they were doing, or just improve on what they were doing. But for the Gambia, this is virgin territory, really, and the diaspora has unbelievable potential.
Absolutely. We've seen recently in Africa, I think at least government is now beginning to have diaspora policies.
Yes.
That sort of thing. The other day I invited on the Viewpoint the one of the consultants on diaspora matters.
That's
as
right. Jen, was it? Yes.
Ahmad Jen, and we were talking about this. What constitutes a diaspora, actually? Quite interesting.
Yes.
So, after all, when you look at it, what the diaspora is, yes, how the diaspora politics, as it were, would reflect what we do here, isn't it? It reflects sort of the home politics. We knew what they did in 2016, as it were, but there was a common platform. Everybody wanted to get rid of Yahya Jammeh in many ways. So the differences really could be buried, could be kicked behind for a while.
That's right.
But now that is gone. So now the divisions that you see here, that's what you're going to see with the diaspora, particularly with government involvement.
Indeed.
What if the people outside, many of them do not support the government of the day, as it were. So if we could have a diaspora that was extra party political, I think that's where we can have a wider canvas, then you can see real impact.
Yeah, I mean, I hold my hand up. For 10 years I was the chairman of something called the Sierra Leone Diaspora Network, and we were not funded by government. In fact, well, not by the Sierra Leone government, interestingly. Department for International Development, DFID, actually funded us because they didn't want the direct influence of the Sierra Leone government. And really what we did was we brought people together who belonged to all the political parties and had all shades of political opinion. And everybody felt that they could be a part of it. Eventually, I put forward a proposal to the president when he was newly elected in 2007, President Nkrumah, and he established an office of the diaspora. But it was an office within the office of the president. And so people started seeing it as political and started distancing themselves from that. And, when we did that story, I said to the, reporter that I will get to meet these people and speak to them and tell them some of the pitfalls they should avoid, including that one of being seen as being part of government or part. Try and establish yourself as a separate entity.
That is precisely it. So I just hope that, because this is new, this was thing that I hope that was the maiden.
It was maiden, indeed. Yes.
So if the ministry wants something long-lasting, sustainable, it must be depoliticized somehow.
Totally.
The directorate will do whatever it does, but perhaps there must be this independent body to be seen to be strictly independent, so that you can rally, get the widest, cast the net to capture the widest possible membership.
Yes.
That wouldn't be sort of divided by party politics, politics in the wider sense, somehow liberals or whatever, conservatives, you will get that.
Yeah,
but the party political bit, that's where the danger of really fragmenting, as it were, what should be united, so that we can maximize the benefits.
And this is it. And if you establish that sort of office, what you can get is that you can tap into what the diaspora can do. So in Sierra Leone, for example, we had doctors, engineers, nurses volunteering to go back every year in a structured way, to go and give their services back to their country. The same can happen here in the Gambia. You can get people skills transfer. You can get people remote teaching now, that sort of thing. But also what we did was to kind of depoliticize it and make sure it did not. In each of the 13 districts, we got people to vote for something that was a development project that they thought was crucial for the benefit of that area. And interestingly, almost all of them voted for a hospital to be either refurbished or built if one wasn't there already. And so that was democratic, and people, and we said, okay, you start a fund and people pay into it. But of course, as always happens, people started mistrusting each other and said, if I pay into this fund, how do I know the people running it well? So we got outsiders, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte, to actually monitor it and to make sure that then people felt, okay, these are independent enough. They're not diaspora, they're not government, and they can monitor. And I think something similar could happen here, and it could be could make a huge difference.
Absolutely, and I hope, I think I'm pretty much certain that by next elections they'll be able to vote.
Well, I was going to come to that.
I
was going to come to that. They're kind of missing out on this, and I've seen lots of people complaining. And I've said, you know what, that horse has bolted. The election's a few weeks away. You're not going to vote.
Not this one.
Try and make sure that whoever gets in, you pressure them by saying, look, we do other things and so on. I mean, the biggest thing that gets talked about is in 2020, the 588 million that Gambians sent. Now, as we speak, up to July, imagine, up to July, already Gambians have sent through formal means $476 million. Dollars, not dollars, dollars, in remittances, formal means. So if they did that in July, the chances are by December they would have topped that 588, which was a record.
Absolutely.
So it shouldn't just be about sending money. Also use other things to kind of influence policies and decisions that can benefit the whole country.
Absolutely, and we also know that diaspora investment sort of outstrips aid.
Indeed,
quite interesting.
And we always have to remind people about this, because they always say, oh, aid is propping up this country. No, it's not. You think about 588 million sent, and you think about other investments apart from remittances, you're talking several billions just in Gambia.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So just how do we structure it?
This is it.
How can we? That's why I'm afraid of this politicization, having the Ministry of Foreign Affairs doing whatever. Of course, it can have that directorate and be facilitative.
Indeed,
in certain things.
I mean, I would point them in the right direction. There's an organization in the UK called the African Foundation for Development. Trust me, everything you're thinking of, they've already thought of. So go to them for help.
So just be facilitative. But the diaspora must be able to organize themselves in such a way that your party political affiliations wouldn't matter.
Absolutely.
This is purely for developmental purposes, the development fund. And we could see sort of a revolution in a generation or so.
I certainly hope so. As I said, I'm a big fan, big supporter of that. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And that fifth story takes us nicely to a break. But guess what? 5 more cracking stories after the break. So don't go away. Join us after this break.
Check out the all-new Tigo 8 at S-Pass Motors. Call 3522-222 or 353-2222 for more information.
Cherry. Looking for the fastest and easiest way to receive money transfers from abroad? Well, QMoney and RIA just made it happen. Now you can receive international money transfer from RIA directly into your QMoney account with no additional cost. Once you receive an SMS alert about your transfer, walk into any QMoney agent across the country to receive your payment for free, or use the money immediately to buy credit, QPower, and other QMoney services. It's fast, safe, and convenient. For more info, call customer care on 133. QMoney, Sinu Calpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching QTV and you're watching The Week in Review with me, Adedarami, and my co-host, Mamadou Mboj. Mr. Mboj, thank you. Really enjoyed it so far. And now, this one, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Yes, I know it's a bit of a mouthful. We've been hearing a lot about it, but it seems now that things are happening to kind of get it moving. Don't believe me? Have a look.
Development cannot come on a platter of gold. There must be conscious effort that we plan development process, we budget for it, we fund it, and we achieve development. And you will all agree with me, as a sub-region, we need to work together collaboratively to ensure that we develop our sub-region and we achieve an integrated sub-region where everything will work, infrastructure, where we can connect ourselves with ease, and where we can collectively work together and take our various economies forward.
There you heard at the annual conference of the Intergovernmental Committee of Senior Officials and Experts. thankfully, they call themselves ICE, ICE for short. Now, Mr. Mboj, those words I chose particularly because it's a case of we've heard this all before. Are you hopeful this time?
I'm always hopeful in the longer term. You know, maybe that makes me sort of like a progressivist.
Quite.
Absolutely. We know about the short-term difficulties, what we are like. Yes. But when you look at the benefits, it's extraordinary, you know, trying to eliminate tariffs up to 90%.
Absolutely.
You know, trying to cut red tape. We know what we are like. This is going to be extremely difficult.
It's going to be tough, because we're talking about an Africa continental free trade area. That means across the continent, not just in parts of it, like we have ECOWAS or we have, you know, in South Africa. You know, no, this is across the continent.
Absolutely. As I understand it, though, what 36 or whatever, 31, 36 have ratified it. So you know,
already,
not all.
Another 19, another 18 or 19, depending on how many countries you think there are in Africa.
It.
Yes.
And you already see that within our national borders, there are question marks of governance.
Indeed.
If these individual countries are really not strong, you know, well governed, I'm not sure what the larger body can do. I think.
Well, this is it, and also, you know, things are happening. You know, within ECOWAS, you have various kind of sub-agreements. And just recently, between the Gambia and Sierra Leone, you have the doing away of, residency permits for citizens of those two countries. That's a kind of separate deal that they've agreed by themselves, and yet it's the way that the rest of it should be going. But somehow I can't see that happening. But you know, should we be making good though it is? You know, for people like myself. Those kind of deals within deals, as it were?
So this is the key, yes. If you're a part of this continental body, with the bilateral arguments you have, I suppose that in some areas, why not? Yes. This depends on the context.
Yes, because some have a kind of, they've had a relationship that goes back centuries, and so they can do Gambia, Sierra Leone. That's been there forever.
One. And so look at Gambia, Senegal.
And Senegal, of course. You
know, just that reality, that geographical, as it were, reality might mean that perhaps you two can have agreements on certain border security and border issues and stuff like that. Even goods and services, given how close things are. So we might have something different. So it all depends on how all these different aspects, the interplay of all of these aspects. Because we will never know. You implement, you see the effect, you adjust here and there, and then you evolve. That is inevitable. This is why I think, of course, in the short term, things will be difficult, arguments between countries and that sort of thing. But when you look at in Europe, that's exactly the same thing that happens.
Well, this is it. I mean, I'm optimistic because I want it to succeed, I have to be honest. Not because there's a record of this sort of thing succeeding in Africa, because we're very good, not just in the Gambia, but across the whole continent. We pass all these fancy protocols and agreements and laws, and we never enforce them or we never implement them. This is one that we can't afford not to implement because the benefits are so immense and unbelievable.
Absolutely, and it's only given our relative weakness economically. I think we can really do well by coming together. United we stand, divided we fall.
Totally.
That said, individually, any other party can just pick you up. But maybe when you come together and even negotiate certain international agreements as a group, that's where you can protect the weak. So absolutely, and having this youthful population, quite hopeful in that way, that would be the underbelly, perhaps of social unrest in certain areas. But again, the benefits, the leaders of tomorrow, I feel will grow with a sort of much broader mindset, much broader conception of themselves, and perhaps more serious. I think we have that incremental improvements as it were in our governance.
I think the viewers are thinking this is two romantics chatting here, not realists. But hey, We're hopeful.
What was it, Cabral? What did Cabral say? I mean, if we really knew how much this utopianism had changed human beings.
Quite, exactly. If only he knew. Yeah, quite. So yes, a good one. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. But we're both hopeful, and we hope this comes to pass. Now, something that I've been advocating for many years, maybe some governments don't like to hear this sort of thing, but I've said, on many an occasion, don't give us money, give us scholarships, give us training facilities. Now, I'm sure they weren't listening to me, but recently, Gambia's women's volleyball team have really benefited from one such agreement. Have a look.
Training in good sports facilities can enhance team and individual player performances. The Gambia women's volleyball team took on to the Salahuddin Sports Complex on Tuesday morning for a practice session. Senior player Anna Marie Bojang shares her thoughts on how it feels to train in such a facility.
It's different from Gambia. We have good trainers, our coaches, good quality balls, the net and steppers. We have been working on them, and I am sure when we continue this, we will get to the next level, inshallah.
Gambia's sports facilities, including those for volleyball, are poor. There is no indoor volleyball court, and the outdoor courts in use are in a poor state, often consisting of a bare concrete floor, which is not suitable for hosting proper competitions. Mariama Jingado talks about the difference between playing on a poor ground and a high-quality facility.
There you heard our colleague Mamoru Gajaga and some of the ladies from the volleyball team. As I said, in the interest of that, Mr. Mboj, I've advocated this sort of thing, send our players to somewhere where they can train in fantastic facilities, and they do well. We look at the countries, other African countries as well as other black countries like Jamaica. You go there and you see the sports infrastructure. The fact that their athletes are doing so well is not an accident. It's not coincidental. It's because they've invested. And it's not all government. In some of the Jamaican facilities, it's been private enterprise that have actually built them. What are your thoughts on this sort of thing, this kind of arrangement where they've been taken to Dubai and they are really, really singing the praises of what they've found?
Absolutely, but we've said something like that here. Sometimes these governing bodies, you really don't have much money, that's true. Correct. But you can be more entrepreneurial. Where you be more facilitated. They need to be doing these things, appealing to other countries with good facilities for this sort of support. This is actually what we need, and it shouldn't just be to Dubai. So anywhere on the continent, we were just talking about the free trade. Absolutely. Right. So anywhere on the continent, particularly maybe in a particular sport, Senegal's got more superior resources and expertise. We have a deal
places
with them
like Morocco. I checked out theirs. I checked out Tunisia's very high standard.
High standard. So we can be working together within the continent to helping each other. Pulling each other up the little that we can.
It's part of the problem that in the Gambia, football is first in terms of sports, and everything else is a distant second. Because if you look at it, some of the women that our women played against in Dubai are professional volleyball players. That is their job. If we are able to come up to a certain standard, some of our young women can actually make a career out of this by playing for really top clubs around the world.
Absolutely, and I think that the governing bodies must take responsibility.
Sure.
We keep saying government is government and government that, but it is really your job to come up with the ideas.
Sure.
You need imagination. Go and find funding, mobilization skills. You need to have a strategy of how do we mobilize this. One must be proactive. How do we get the media to be talking more about table tennis? You don't hear about that anymore. So the government, the governing bodies, just sit there. They seem to be quite complacent, I have to say this, and just be reactive, constantly complaining about the lack of resources instead of being innovative, being entrepreneurial.
I mean, in the Gambia, we're lucky. We have Tijan Jaite, who's a kind of sports roving ambassador, and he's one of the ones who facilitated this. And really what I'm hoping for is that other sports that are kind of under-resourced, underfunded, will see this and reach out to him and say, what about us? And I think he's willing and he's ready, but we need more of that. We can't just leave it with one person.
That's it. We need more Tejangitis.
Indeed.
This is what I mean. You see, individuals, whoever, private sector, anybody, that kind of innovative entrepreneurial spirit, that's really what we need. But instead, what do you get? Mostly, government is not doing this, government is not doing that. That dependency culture, nothing is going to happen. Right. Let's be honest with ourselves. Nothing is going to happen. Or rather, things will happen asymmetrically. Particular sports, perhaps because of who's leading them,
will get to a certain level.
Will get to a certain level, and other areas wouldn't, because they really do not have quite the leadership to make them relevant.
Sure. But there needs to be planning, there needs to be structure, and it needs to be coordinated.
Precisely.
Totally agree with you. Thank you for that. Now on to something else. And coincidentally, just before we came on air, Mr. Mbodje and I were talking, and I happened to mention the school I attended in Sierra Leone, CKC, Christ the King College in Bo, and how competitive the school was, both within the school and with other schools. Recently, there was an inter-school competition in Basse, but it was a competition with a difference. Have a look.
5 lower basic schools, 4 upper basic, and 3 senior schools face each other as friends, family, teachers, and colleagues turned out at the Basse Youth Center to support. Destiny Domain won the best in drama for lower basic schools, while SOS won for spelling in the same category. For the senior secondary schools, Nasir came top in impromptu speech, and St. George's claimed the trophy in drama. Meanwhile, the new Kobakunda Upper and Senior School took this event as an opportunity to test themselves against the established Nasir and St. George's Senior Secondary Schools and won 3 of the 8 awards in their respective categories. Imagine the winners in drama and quiz for the upper basic schools and runner-up in the drama for the senior schools. At the end of the events, a very pleased Mr. Aderebio Sunday Emmanuel, the teacher guiding Destiny Domain and Kobakunda schools, says the event was an exposure to his students to learn new ideas to develop themselves in both academic and extracurricular activity.
I totally love this. I grew up in a time when schools competed with each other, Mr. Mbodje, in exactly this sort of thing: quiz, drama, spelling, impromptu speech. I was amazed, and I have to say, Fode Mane, who narrated that, and Alaji Jallo, who you saw as one of the judges, actually were amongst the organizing committee for this. So, we kind of must declare that interest here. But we thought it was such a fantastic competition that we should cover it, in spite of the fact that 2 of our correspondents were involved in the planning of it. And when they told me about it, I thought it was brilliant. Mr. Mbodje, I've gone on and on. What were your thoughts about it?
It must be a generational thing. Because when I was at high school as well, the competition between Gambia High School, St. Augustine's, Muslim, Nusrat, and even within Gambia High School, there was a lot of competition really in classes.
Yes.
And then we had quizzes, debates. I mean, the learning, sort of teaching, learning, ecology was just entirely different. I get a sense that it is different now.
Yeah.
But this is it. I mean, schools, universities, anywhere, they are really nurseries for molding a fully rounded person, the human being, you know what I mean? It's not simply in the classroom, because that's where now we know what our problems are within our society.
Indeed.
It is really for the schools really to have that historical sense and see how do we teach our people to become, our kids, our students, to become responsible citizens tomorrow. And all of these things matter. You must allow the totality of the experience, not simply with the book, but the totality of the experience. That's really what builds the person. And schools must be like that.
They really must, and as I said, I said to them, I was disappointed that they didn't include a sporting element to it, because the schools I went to, I was lucky both in Sierra Leone and for a couple of years in England. They put as much effort and resources into sports as they did into academic pursuits, and we always kind of felt we benefited from it. But this ends up giving people, I think you've said it, a kind of rounded, the totality of it. You come out of that experience a more rounded person and kind of prepared for the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you build a character? I mean, particularly, you've mentioned the sports bit. We had my father, Joseph Goff, who is always referring back to him because of his approach to education, where sports would be a supplementary to a general education. I mean, how many times have we heard, I mean, in Britain, what do they tell you? The Battle of Waterloo was won on the playgrounds of Eton. Stuff like that. So, yes, you teach us all team building, working in a team.
Yeah.
We always complain that, I mean, as Gambians, maybe as Africans, I do not know, we just cannot do group things.
Yes, correct.
Sooner or later, we fall apart. That individualism, and when decisions do not go my way, I say, okay, I'm not part of the group anymore. Instead of staying, I said, okay, I've lost this time, but next time I'll manage to persuade you guys, or your decision will fail. We didn't give the right outcomes. Then mine will come in. So just to have the discipline. It will help if they start doing these group things.
Yes, indeed.
At school, the sports, that particularly helps. And that and to encourage, cultivate healthy competition.
Yeah, which is what we saw.
That sort of thing. Knowing that my opponent is not my enemy.
Indeed.
That will help even in our politics.
Sure.
You know?
Exactly.
It will help even in our politics.
Yeah.
So to get that sense that we are not enemies, we are merely opponents. For me, sports is kind of like the metaphor for life, if you know what I mean. There are rules, and we have our referee, the government or the courts. We apply the rules, we play fairly. We are on opposing sides, but we are not enemies.
Indeed.
We are engaged in the same activity. And at the end of the match, we shake hands.
That's right.
Even in politics, this is really my metaphor for life. How you deal with people. We are not enemies, we just disagree. But we'll still shake hands.
Great one. Thank you for that. And to our colleagues in Basse there, we hope other parts of the country emulate what you've done. As I said, totally loved it. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our penultimate story. Speedy access to justice. Yes. Nobody likes court cases dragging on, but they always seem to. Anyway, people are doing things to try and solve it. Have a look.
The Gambia's constitution guarantees the right to fair trial within a reasonable time. In line with this, the NHRC embarked on a study on the state of human rights in the Gambia. The study found out that inmates lamented the years they spent behind bars, waiting for trial or access to legal aid and counsel, which becomes a challenge.
We appreciate the fact that justice must not only be accessible, but it must be accessible to all. And the judiciary also has that in mind in trying to decentralize the whole justice delivery system, though we are present in the regions, but not in all the regions. So expansion is part of our strategy plan to expand and make sure that we are available in all the regions so that justice can be accessible to all.
Now, I know what you're thinking, dear viewer. You're thinking, just the other week, he had this thing where the judiciary were appealing for 1.2 billion to expand. And here's another story along those lines. So no apologies. Yes, it is along those lines. We heard their justice delayed is justice denied. Mr. Mboj, for far too long there's been a lot of talk. But now, first of all, with that funding that the judiciary was seeking to complete 5-year strategy, to complete the final 4 years. And now with this, we heard about, it's been decentralized so that there is not this log jam. Surely to be applauded.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every improvement counts.
Sure.
I mean, we've got all these rights, of course, but when you don't have the resources or the structures, it wouldn't happen.
Sure.
So justice delayed, justice denied, absolutely. That legal maxim, you hear it all the time. Sure. But again, it's limited by what you can do and what we can't do. Yeah. So with me, when you have these workshops, what I want them to do in the recommendations and stuff is that given our circumstances, what can I improve?
Indeed.
See, it must be measurable, one step at a time.
Yes.
We just don't want to be going around in circles. I mean, you will have the money, you spend it, you go on. I mean, would you even conduct a survey? What is your baseline? Where do I want to go? I think we must be more scientific, if you know what I mean.
Because I did wonder whether
measure.
Yes, I did wonder whether they looked at where things could be improved on what is already existing. And they always say to you, supposing you didn't get the money you asked for, could you still make improvements? And if so, what? But we might have to cut it there because time is our enemy, and we have one more story to go, and it's an important one. So thank you for that, Mr. Mboj.
I'm sure we'll come back to this.
I have no doubt. As I said, we mentioned it the other week. I mentioned it again this week. And now on to our final story. We are in Remembrance Weekend. And this is something that it's not a kind of remote thing that only sort of is commemorated in Britain. It's also commemorated here in the Gambia. Have a look.
At the outbreak of the First World War, up to 2,000 young men were conscripted from the Gambian regiment to serve in the war through the West Africa Frontier Force, fighting in the battlegrounds of Togoland, Tanganyika, which is present-day Tanzania, and Tobruk, Libya, North Africa. Historian Hasum Sise explains.
On the war front, both in the First World War and in the Second World War, Gambians participated, lost their lives. Like dozens were wounded, so as to help to save the world from the menace of Hitler and his cohorts.
Second World War ended 1945. Mr. Mboj, we heard there, save the world from Hitler and his cohorts. But what it did also for the colonies, including the Gambia, was it sped up the process to seek independence, because they were saying that, we're fighting to save you in a kind of essentially a European war that we've been dragged into. And what's interesting about the Gambia, in the First World War, 1914, 1918, the Gambians were conscripted. In the Second, many more volunteered. But this is hardly ever recognized in Britain, where it's a big deal, by the way. Everything shuts down on, the 11th of the 11th, and on Remembrance Sunday, the whole nation watches TV. But they hardly ever mention the African colonies, including the likes of Gambia.
Absolutely, and we really were really part of it, part of the
Very
coalition. We had the international coalition, and I understand that when you go to the Banjul Memorial, what is in the First World War, 9 soldiers died.
That's right.
So the remembrance is for all of us. We are also part of it,
of course,
as it were. And it's good to remember, not for its own sake. I mean, isn't it really? We give them honor by trying to avoid war, isn't it? So I just do not want to go through this whole process of remembrance just as a ritual.
Yeah, give it some meaning.
It has to have some meaning, and the meaning can only be, those people are dead. Yeah. The meaning can only be that we will try to avoid any future occurrences such as these, really.
On that note, beautiful note to end it on, let's avoid war and let's avoid future conflict. Mr. Mboj, thank you as ever. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
And of course, to you, the viewer, thank you for watching. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.